Hello and welcome to this edition of The Hub on CGTN in partnership with the World Economic Forum. Today I'll be moderating a session for the World Economic Forum here in Tianjin, China on China-Africa relations and how transformative, or mutually transformative should I say, about this relationship for people, businesses and policymakers on both sides. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I want to welcome all of you here in person and attending the conference online to this World Economic Forum session of the Summer Davos here in Tianjin. We're talking about China-Africa relations, a mutually transformative relationship today. And first of all, I really want to take this opportunity and welcome all of you to China, or shall I say back to China, after a multiple year absence. Has been a difficult few years, I know that, but welcome back. I hope you have had a good journey so far, and welcome to this session. China and Africa relations is certainly one that is both marked with potential and controversies from time to time. Oftentimes when people talk about China-Africa relations, we tend to look at it from a bird's eye view. But down to the specifics, the nitty-gritty of the relationship, there's so many components of it. It's multifaceted. So today I think is a very important conversation, and I'm really honored to have, I would say, a cutting-edge group of panelists joining us today to delve into the specifics of this evolving landscape of China-Africa interaction. We hope to walk away today with many nuanced understanding of this relationship. Without further ado, let me introduce the panelists for today. We have sitting next to me the Honorable Felix Tapiwa Mhona. He's the Minister of Transport and Infrastructure Development of Zimbabwe. Welcome, sir. Great to see you. And also we have Madam Nonkululeko Nyembezi, the Chairperson of Standard Bank Group of South Africa. That is the largest bank anywhere in Africa. We have Rickard Ingvarsson, Chief Executive Officer from Scan Global Logistics Asia. Last but certainly not least, Wang Yiwei is the professor from Renmin University from People's Republic of China, who writes extensively about China-Africa relations, among other things. So let me start with you, Minister, if you don't mind. China-Africa relations, of course, is a huge topic, but China-Zimbabwe relation in particular is one that is marked by friendship. So how do you really look at China-Africa interactions in general and China-Zimbabwe friendship in particular?
The relations that we have, that are strong relations based on our founding fathers, and as we speak, the current leadership, His Excellency Comrade Emmerson Mnangagwa and Comrade Xi Jinping, which is of sound foundation. And I'm happy to say, yes, in Africa, you have seen that we are endowed with resources. And this is something that we must brag about as Africa. And what we've been hearing for years is the value addition of our resources, where not necessarily from China and Zim and Africa in general, but we are saying we also need to tap into our resources, one, and also be in a position to value add. That's why we'll see, and in a number of fora, people talking about neocolonialism, in the sense that resources are actually going one direction from Africa to Asia or even beyond. But what is of paramount importance, Brother Wang, is that, yes, the relations that we have that have been cemented, and we need to ride on that relationship. And maybe that to take it closer home, when you talk of Zimbabwe, we really enjoy cordial relations with China. And as we speak, and within the next 2 weeks, we'll be commissioning one of the largest airports in Africa, the Robert Gabriel Mugabe International Airport, which is as a result of this relationship that we are talking about. So it is very important to then say, and it is historic in the sense that it was completed within 2 years, which is something that is of paramount importance. And not only that, if you look at the energy sector, everyone is crying. We are talking about close to 800 million without energy globally. But we are saying we are mitigating the issues to do with energy shortages in Zimbabwe, where recently again we've commissioned the Wange 7 and 8 as a result of this relationship that we are having with China.
Yeah, there are so many issues I want to ask your opinions on, but for the moment, Madam Nyembezi, how do you look at this evolving partnership between China and Africa from the perspective of being the owner of the largest bank in South Africa?
Well, it's actually somewhat more, from my perspective at least, more nuanced than my colleague here from Zimbabwe. Standard Bank Group has had a relationship with ICBC dating back over 20 years now. In fact, I would hazard the guess that that is still the single largest outward investment in the African continent by a Chinese corporate. So it's a long-lasting relationship. It's gone through lots of changes of leadership. It certainly hasn't been a consistency, but it was born out of very clear mutual benefits. So each side was clear what it is that the interests that were being served by this relationship, and so it's predicated on solid ground. Together with ICBC, we have collaborated over the years in supporting trade between China and African countries, quite a few African countries, what we refer to as the China-Africa Trade Corridor. And we are today the leading financier and supporter of all types of financial services that are required to make that thrive and prosper. So that's been a really, really good collaboration that's lasted years. And I believe that with the free trade agreement, that's going to become even more important, because all of the kinds of infrastructural developments and other development in Africa will require massive support from big balance sheets. I would say, on balance, the view today of the average African, and I'll quote a survey that has just been released, the average view on the street is quite positive. It's the first time that I have seen a survey of that size. It was multiple thousand in the sample, where the view for most Africans of China is positive. In fact, more positive than the US. So something is changing, and in my mind, it's because this relationship is evolving and having multiple touch points that people can see for themselves are positive net for the country, more so for some countries than others.
Rickard, let me turn to you. So you're in logistics business. You have a lot of in-person experiences on the ground regarding how the Chinese initiatives are transforming the local markets. Can you talk to us a little bit about China-Africa relations from your own perspective, from your business perspective?
Okay, thanks, Wang, and good morning to everyone. I'm a bit overwhelmed being here with these experts, but I'm already very intrigued of listening and learning from you guys. So this is seen from my humble side and from what we do in our company. What I can say, we are very proud to be the biggest humanitarian transportation supplier for UNICEF and World Health Program, World Health Organization, World Food Program, and the peacekeeping forces. And as the lady said in the sitting earlier, Africa is not one country, it's 54, and it's massively different, with different needs and different outlooks as it is, but it's a growing area. And for us, it's super important that the trade between China and the African continent develop and prosper, not only for imports of vaccines and equipment for manufacturing, but also for exports, and not the traditional only the raw materials, but allowing and helping customers that we carry cargo for to deliver it safely to landlocked areas, or where maybe the airports are not fully delivered in a safe manner, without being tempted to pay someone off, because that's, we have to say, there are areas in Africa, there are areas in Europe as well in South America that are have a bit of an issue with corruption and so. So you just have to be mindful and be professional in the approaches. But I'm very thrilled that I have no political issues of what people may be talking about. I just see this as a natural course of development, and it will not only help the African continent, but it will help the entire world, you know, to increase and erase poverty and give good education and opportunities to, you know, the youngest and fastest growing continent of the world.
Professor Wang, you wrote extensively about China-Africa. I lost count how many articles you sent me over WeChat about China-Africa issues.
over Africa.
Over the year. You've been to Africa, what, to over a dozen countries now? So talk to us about how do you see as, of course, the complementarities between China and Africa? As China is aging, of course, and Africa being the youngest continent, and also the Chinese economy is transforming into hopefully a consumer consumption-led and consumption-driven economy, whereas Africa is also trying to move up the value chain. How do you see these occurrences?
Thank you. Firstly, I'm actually not just focused on Africa. I'm more focused on Europe. I'm the Monnet Chair professor, the European Union. But why I focus on Europe in recent decades? Because of the Belt Road Initiative, and also I think I'm an international relations scholar. You need to focus on developing countries, developing continent, the most dynamic, and hope that by 2030, 42% of their youth will be Africans. So this is hope. This is the future. This is not the new continent. Actually, the human beings originated in Lucy, you know, millions of years ago is from Ethiopia.
Yeah.
So that's the reason. Okay. Also, we are Chinese are very humble. We learn a lot from Europe. You know how to deal with, how to work better, you know, in Africa. The comparative advantage of China, actually, compared to Europe, I think three things. First, visit trip of the foreign minister of China every year in the past 17 years is to Africa. China always say we are the developing country, so the people veto power in the United Nations Security Council. This is not for China. This is for developing countries. And Africa is all of the African 55, they are developing countries. So that's, I think, political foundation is very strong. So we view our relation with Africa as South-South, so this brotherhood. This is a community of shared future, it's naturally. Second, I think China modernization is very attractive to the Africans because we are very fresh of the modernization, urbanization, agriculture, all of this. Maybe Europeans, Americans, maybe 100 years ago, is not adapt to the local condition of Africa. So China actually is to transform the high standard of the West to match the Africans' condition. Because we know how to do this. So 40 years ago, China's per capita GDP is only 1/3 of the Sub-Saharan African countries, even less. But now, you know, China is very advanced. So it's very attractive to Africa. So we can share some experience, but we have never saw our model. I think that's very important. Thirdly, as you mentioned, it's very complementary. Before, we are very complementary with the West, their advanced economy. But now the views of China are the strategic competitor. But we views of Africa as a hope. I think your aging society, and also industrialization, digitalization, Africa's young dynamic. We have many complementary cooperation projects in Africa. Millions of Chinese live there.
Maybe can you share with us some of your experiences of visiting the African countries and how you see the Chinese cooperation are perhaps transforming the employment, the markets, and also the livelihoods there?
Well, many love stories. One time when I visit Kenya, there's a railway, you know, the Mombasa to Nairobi. I saw there's the slogan is, let the zebra can cross the tomb without need to kowtow. So that's protect the environment.
That is a zebra cross the channel without kowtow.
Yeah. So not just human rights, animal rights also very important. That's apparently. So we learned how to do that. We have the better experience in other places. So we are China learning very fast. That's the first story. Second story to South Africa. When I visit Mandela's hometown, this is very attractive to me. It's called Ubuntu. Says, I am because we are. Okay, that's the community of shared future. Huh? You can, you know, in English, I always capital. But I is small in Chinese culture. I can be I only through you. We can be other. We us, not I. So I think I learned a lot from Africans' spirit and culture. So China's approach is say, yes, high standard, but you need to transfer the high standard to match the local condition. So China is the bridge to connect the West and Africa.
I think it's very important to understand the particular attraction of African countries towards China. It is the fact that in our lifetime, we have seen a country lift that many people out of poverty. That we had not seen, because clearly Europe took centuries to get to the same point. This is an experiment that has never been done in history. The only thing is, as more and more African governments sent many delegations to China to study the model, to see how it could be replicated, we simply couldn't replicate it, because there were just certain dynamics of Chinese society, how the government is made up, how the people's culture is, that did not match into Africa. So what you're saying about you could take it to an African level is true, but up to a point. I think the Africans have to do the rest, because there are very, very big cultural differences that make what happened in China quite difficult to replicate in other places.
That's what I think very important, because I'm the teacher. You know, I just came back from Nissan, the hometown of Confucius. Confucius actually very famously, 3 people work there, 1 be my teacher. So not just 3 people work there, I be their teacher. No, we asked the Africans and other developing countries can share some experience of China, but we never sell our model to them.
Minister Mhona, let me turn to you again. I mean, this is also a fantastic opportunity, I think, through the World Economic Forum to really educate us, the Chinese, and people from the rest of the world, more about Africa. Because these days you don't hear as much about Africa from mainstream international media, who might focus on international geopolitical hotspots, or the war, or scandals of their domestic politics. But really, what is Africa is a myth. So can you maybe talk about things that you think is important to your country? For example, urbanization. I know more people are moving into the cities at an unprecedented rate in Africa, the youth population and digitalization. What do you think are the important trends for the world to know about your country and the continent?
Thank you so much, Brother Wang. And just to start by inviting you to Africa, and in particular to Zimbabwe.
I'd love to take my crew. My photographer is there, my producer there.
Yes, and to say, you are very right. It's about a myth of Africa. But in the first place, we need to blame ourselves as Africa. You heard from my sister that we are talking about 54, 55 countries, and we are fragmented in terms of the approach. Just to cite a good example, if you want to fly to Senegal, my sister's country, seated there, you need to go out of Africa to go back to Africa. So the connectivity now issues. So at times it comes back to us as a continent, so that the moment we are fragmented, then we are taken advantage of. And I'm happy to say such kind of a fora would then mitigate such or allay such fears that what sort of a continent is this. But I want to say, yes, Africa is a beautiful continent. And we also want to thank the resources that I alluded to earlier on, that we have got everything in Africa. So at the end of the day, it's also very important to say, how then do we move a step forward in trying to mitigate and also address such fears, and to say to the outside world, come to Africa. But you find, I can just cite a good example. There is cricket happening as we speak in Zimbabwe for world qualifiers, but it's not being broadcast. So it shows, like you alluded to,
the what?
World qualifiers for cricket.
Okay, cricket.
Yes, there are about 10 countries there, and also America is included. I'm just citing a good example. But you find that it's not in the public domain. So at times it's the packaging of what is happening in Africa that is not within the purview of the generality. So at the end of the day, we are saying these are some of the issues that we need also to make sure we address. And we are saying is the digital era that we are in, and you talked about the demographics in terms of the youth. Like in Zimbabwe, we are talking about 65 to 70% being the youth. So we've got the energy to drive. And you find that the other myth, you'll be talking of ministers, they are maybe of advanced age, but I'm seated here, and which is also a myth. If you then talk of ministers coming from Africa, but we are very happy to have such a forum where we can articulate issues, where we can say to the global world, come to Africa and demystify what you hear. And a number of people, when they visit African countries, they are mesmerized. Whatever they see there, against what they hear, is totally different. So I think it also calls for a holistic approach as a continent, so that we need to unite and also address some of the concerns from a holistic perspective.
Can you name 2 or 3 things that you think people from the outside world might be mesmerized by, as you said, by Zimbabwe?
The endowments, we are talking of close to 70 minerals that we can exploit just for Zimbabwe. And you are talking of the lithium, the one that is very topical here, the electric vehicles that we're talking about. And yesterday we managed to visit one of the factories here where they are producing about 460 to 65 per day units. But they need the resources. And you find that we are in the top 6 within the world when it comes to the production of lithium. But we are saying lithium is moving as raw as it is without value adding it, which is something that if you value add per ton, you can get close to 70,000 per ton. But if you just export it as raw, you're getting $600 per ton, is an example. So you see that these are such kind of issues that we need to address to say, yes, in terms of infrastructure, the opportunities, we have the rail, we have the water bodies, and which are very magnificent. And if you talk of Zimbabwe, we brag of close to 10,000 water bodies. So imagine such kind of investment that you can then tap into. The maritime issues. So we are saying even the skies, open skies policy, and we ride on a policy of any given nation. And in particular in Zimbabwe, we say we are a friend to all and an enemy to none. But you find in other jurisdictions we are impeded, where we have got illegal sanctions imposed on us. So at times we then tend to side and move together with those who would be on our side. Thank you.
All right. Sure. Thanks for these clarifications. Madam Chairperson, let me turn to you. China had this huge, massive infrastructure program called the BRI, Belt and Road Initiative, and Africa is aggressively pursuing this free trade area initiative. How do you see the synergy between the two going forward?
Yeah. So whilst we were looking for technology and manufacturing that was far more commodities-based in the recent past, what this opens up is consumer-facing products. Now you marry that with this population, this so-called demographic dividend in Africa, where in the next 10, 20 years, you're going to be seeing an Africa that is far more educated, that is far more urbanized, and that is far more digitally savvy, just from this youth factor than before. You then take number 3, the fact that actually it's a very useful lens to think of African countries as not just put this country lens aside and think about cities, that your fastest growing, top 10 fastest growing cities in the next 10, 20 years are going to be in Africa. You then overlay that with Belt and Road, which presumably would have already put in place the infrastructure for those consumer markets to be reachable by whoever comes into it. So I think that it's not just 2 factors coming together, but a multiplicity of factors that make it, in my mind, a compelling proposition for Chinese manufacturers to seriously consider Africa as an expansion node for some of the things that they have done and done so successfully here. So if Europe and the US are anything to go by, as countries get richer and people demand higher wages, and we've seen it here, right? People start to demand higher wages, and therefore what used to be a competitive factor for China, which was a dirt cheap labor rate, starts to disappear out of the horizon. Where are you going to go? All right, you're going to Vietnam, you're going to Philippines, but Africa is a realistic prospect for some of the low value addition manufacturing initially. Now, where do you see this today? You see it in Ethiopia. You see a lot more of Chinese manufacturers moving to Ethiopia doing simple things initially, but over time, even that will increase. So I think that, just one was the underpinning was the extraction of minerals. The next one was Belt and Road in the infrastructure development. The next one becomes this free trade area so that you get more integration. On top of that, you overlay the transfer of technology and the low-scale manufacturing, and over time, more and more sophisticated manufacturing. So it's a story that has got quite long legs, and we'll be here in 20, 30 years' time looking back saying, actually, we were naive. It happened in a much bigger scale than I'm saying now. And so you look at all of that and then just overlay climate change. Climate change is an excellent example of a sector that A, has scale, it's got size. 2, China has significant IP and significant technology in the area. Africa has significant endowment in the area, not only in terms of raw material, but in terms of natural sunlight, wind, etc., and where the two combine in the kinds of sort of virtuous circle that I'm trying to get to. So I think this is the one thing that for me is really an optimistic and I think exciting prospect for joint China-Africa mutually transformative initiatives.
Yeah, mutually. I love this word, mutually transformative. That is it's an all-inclusive topic. Sure.
So, which areas of manufacturing do you say fastest growing on the African continent? Is that fashion, textiles, or?
Well, for now it's been smartphones.
Smartphones, yeah, of course.
And today, 64% of smartphones used in the African continent come from China. Wow. And for Africa, that is so because we skipped, completely leapfrogged the landline phase. We had maybe 4 or 5% penetration of landlines. We went straight into mobile. Number one. Number two, you have a disproportionate proportion of Africans who are unbanked. So payments and movement of money happens on a phone. Yeah. Mobile banking is high, its highest penetration on planet Earth is in Africa. So if you think about products and services that support that ecosystem, you will see those trialed and actually proliferate in the African continent.
Finally, I want to take this opportunity to really thank all our panelists for traveling all the way to Tianjin, China. Thank you for this very lively discussion and debate. Thank you very much.